can't see the people in this row, so I'm just going to move around a little bit.
Yeah.
I was born in a land called Pakistan, some 13,000 kilometers away. That's my homeland. We were collectively just India before we were colonized, so we were kind of a new country. I came to Gadigal country some 11 years ago to study filmmaking. Most people don't know that about me. I'm a filmmaker by trade. I'm a storyteller at heart. That's kind of, it'll be a theme that drives my story forward. I was escaping male violence and I came to Australia to rebuild life because I did really feel like I could rebuild where it had all happened. And I studied filmmaking at the University of Sydney. I graduated, and in the hustle and grind of being a migrant surviving on new land, I didn't really think of how am I going to get a job after graduation. And even though I was one of the top graduates of my batch, do you want to guess how many job offers I got for graduating with a branded degree that cost me thousands and thousands of dollars?
We have one guess.
We have one guess from Andrew.
There's two shown in picture.
We've got zero, we've got two! Any bidders? Zero. Alright, the zeros win. I had the zero job offers. I couldn't even get a free internship. So I realized, welcome everyone who just joined. I was a migrant. I had to keep doing something. So I was already working part-time in the refugee sector at the time. So I decided to do a master's in community development. And I specialized in policy, particularly policy impacting women's development in a country. And I was the first Muslim youngest president of the Sydney Union, which is where a lot of our prime ministers come from. And I graduated, and guess how many job offers I got? Zero! Yes, that's right. Congratulations, everyone. Yes, that's right. I still didn't get any of the 70 or 100 grad roles that I applied for upon graduating. And I realized that the myth that I was taught, if I work hard enough, I'm going to make it eventually, it was bullshit. It wasn't going to happen. There was so many biases that I, as the applicant, needed to guide the employer through. Like, do you see how your face dropped when you saw me walk in the door? Because when people talk to me on the phone, they can't tell where I'm from. And then I walk in the door, and those who have unconscious biases, I can tell how their face changes. Like, oh, but it might be like an Anglo-Saxon American person. Far from it. So I decided at that point I was gonna try out everything. Until then, I was so set. I wanted to tell stories about women. Whatever the medium was, I didn't care. I wanted people to build empathy with the stories of women who were surviving, living, and rebuilding from violence. So I decided to go to every event that was happening in Sydney at the time, one of which, luckily, was the Spark Festival. Has anyone heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah, a few people. Yeah, have y'all ever been? Yeah, it's a lovely space to be a part of. It was at Spark Fest in 2019 that I went to a talk by Mark Brand, who called himself a social entrepreneur. And I'd never heard of the term. I wasn't even interested in business because I grew up with a dad who runs a small business and he had to work so hard all the time. And I really didn't want that. But I had taken my blinders off. I was open to anything. So I listened to Mark Brand's talk about how he started 6 different businesses that were centered around the problems that he himself was experiencing, firstly, and 2 was a part of the community that was experiencing the problem. So kind of like for me, women, migrant women experiencing or have experienced violence, lots of intersections with who he is as a person. And his business is centered around impact, not profit. That was the first time I heard of the concept of business for good. And I realized that a lot of the ideas that I had, that I thought I needed an employer to give me permission, and then I would execute on all those ideas, I realized I could do that myself. And it was a little bit like, it's not as comfy being out in the open. It's like having a net in the ocean versus the open ocean, because you can make whatever you want of it, but it is a little bit scary. I was also a young person having just graduated university, and I was looking at my finances. And I grew up kind of financially literate in that my father, he always gave us pocket money to manage so that all the kids understood budgeting. But we also were a Muslim household. Now, Islamic economics is very egalitarian. It is innately fairly anti-capitalist. So Islamic economics and capitalism, they don't mix so well together. So I grew up hearing a lot of things about financial institutions and capitalism and how not to trust them, and they're set up to enslave certain people so that certain other people can rule over them and stuff like that. So I had a lot of money stories and money wounds around living in a Western capitalist system. And when I sat down after graduation and did the maths of how long do I have to work, how much do I need to save up in order to retire safely, I realized that it wasn't really going to happen for me. And I was like, well, so am I going to just keep hustling forever and never feel safe again? And that's when I learned about investing for the first time in my life. And that is an ongoing journey, because it's not one of the lessons I learned about money in my own journey and the creation of MoneyGirl and all the students that we've worked with is that feeling of safety that I craved at the end of the day has nothing to do with actual money. The feelings we have about money are rarely solved by money itself, because they're mostly coming from either our own trauma in our lifetime, or our parents' trauma, or our grandparents' trauma, what wars and depressions they've lived through, and the stories that get passed down generation to generation. So that's when, in 2019, I started MoneyGirl. These are a few other things I've done. I was once Chief Diversity Officer of a fintech startup. That was a fun phase. I have a podcast show called The Great Tangent, where I go on many tangents with people I admire. I started MoneyGirl in 2019, partially to heal my own money journey. I wanted to learn for myself. And my primary focus, given my personal experience and also the sector that I was working in, I was working in the refugee sector, then the DV sector, then the refugee sector. Again, the common theme that I was seeing was people experiencing violence at home were unable to leave violent households because they weren't in control of their money. Even when they had access to their finances, they didn't know what to do with it because either previously an abusive father, brother, partner was controlling the resources, or they simply never were given access to any of their own resources. So even when they left, they would come back 3 to 5 times before they would finally leave for good. And often, money was amongst the top 3 contributors to that pattern. So I was like, okay, cool. Sadly, my story is not unique at all. And that's the main root cause that I was passionate about. It wasn't money. I still really don't care about the how-tos of money. And so I'm sorry if you had any how-to questions about money, because I'm not the person to answer those. But I was interested in the stories that play out, mostly inside of us, that direct us towards the decisions that we make. Those decisions then have an impact on our external world, like these women and children who kept going back to abusive households. There's an impact in the external world. But what's playing out is very much on the inside. That's what I wanted to help myself and others with. Well, our aim is to empower young women with financial knowledge so they can have the independence and the choice to make sound financial decisions. Confidence and choice were two of our key pillars when we were developing the product. My co-founder and I, we were at the time, still are both young women of color. So because our main aim was impact, the way we started this was we had our own assumptions about what people needed based on what we needed. So we wrote all of them down. We're like, here's what we think young women like us need. And then we went out and talked to about 100 to 200 young women like us who we wanted to serve through the program. So they gave us then heaps of feedback on which ones of our assumptions were right, what's wrong, what do they want to add on. So the first 2 rounds of the MoneyGirl product that were created were very much co-created with 100 to 200 community members who would have been directly impacted by it as well. Which made it quite tedious, by the way. It took us a really long time because we did quantitative and qualitative interviews. However, we were really attached to it being an evidence-based solution because Band-Aid solutions don't have long-term sustainable impact. Why financial literacy? For the reasons that I've said, there's a pattern with women being able to leave abusive households. And hey, listen, if you think like that's very rare, statistically, every other woman you know has experienced that at some point in her life and has made the choice to leave or stay. The financial impact of financial illiteracy goes beyond that, obviously. Women in Australia, on average, earn 16 to 24% less than their male counterparts. They will likely take time off for carer responsibilities, whether it's their own family, their partner's family. Carer responsibilities are mostly held by women for now. That means they forego super pay promotions, etc. during that time period. So by the time they're retiring, women in Australia have about 47% less in their superannuation than men. Women in Australia also live longer than men, so they need more money in their retirement to live out those years. Now those statistics are for white, cis, able-bodied people, FYI. We don't really have very accurate statistics on what it's like if there's someone who's existing on any intersection. People with disabilities, people of color, Indigenous women are at the bottom of the rung, experiencing the highest pay gaps and pay disparities in Australia. So these statistics are significantly worse for women of color, for women with disabilities, and Indigenous women especially. We wanted to, because we were targeting young people, our aim was for this to be a preventative solution. So we were trying to get in young, which meant we needed it to be fun, sure, but especially accessible. Accessible in all the ways. Accessible in terms of location, accessible in terms of neurospicy abilities, accessible in terms of language and mediums. that the young people use. So what it looks like is a structured program that goes over 6 weeks. And every week we're covering off one topic that is relevant particularly to young women. Love and money is all about healthy relationships, what they look like, and how money can be managed in a relationship in a healthy manner. This is what it's ended up looking like. Like I said, over the years, there was many iterations based on what the community was telling us. And I think these, don't worry about it. I wanted to show this because this is how we overcomplicated things. Don't worry about this. This is not what our impact assessment looks like anymore. This is what it used to look like. And what I wanted to include this because one of the lessons I learned is it's only as complicated as we make it out to be. So everything can be done in many ways. Some of them are simpler than others, and sometimes we choose the most complicated route because we've been told that that makes us legitimate, perhaps, or for many other reasons. We spent months creating our impact framework and impact evaluation and assessment framework. And you know what? In the end, I don't think it matters at all. Because there's many businesses and organizations making huge impact. And they don't worry about how complicated their impact assessment framework is. And there's many organizations who have a very thorough impact assessment framework and they publish their numbers, etc., and they're rubbish. So, we could have spent that time moving on to the next thing, but we made it hard for ourselves, and it was so hard to keep up with this very thorough impact assessment framework for a very small team that eventually we had to trim the fat and keep only what mattered. And these are the numbers that we chose to keep track of. How many people actually graduate from the course, that being the 6-week course. So in the past 5 years, 1,000+ women have graduated from the full course. We don't track anymore, for example, how many people have been in workshops, standalone workshops, how many people are reading or accessing our online content or going through our workshops online. No, we have to keep it simple because we're a small team. How many scholarships have we given out? That's important to us because our model uses profits from the B2B offering to subsidize offering for the B2C clients, who are mostly women who cannot access financial literacy because finance is a barrier to them. And confidence. So confidence and choice was one of our key pillars in the product. So we measure how confident people are feeling before and after. So we have an idea of the orange is not confident, blue is confident. So this is what we like to see. How are people feeling as they leave? Because all we want to do is if they remember nothing from the course, we want them to remember the feeling so that if financial literacy was this room, when they exit the room, they leave the door open and they're willing to come in again. So these are my top 5 lessons from my first foray in social entrepreneurship. Create your own table. Don't wait for permission. I waited for permission for years from employers to create the things I wanted to create before I learned I can just create them myself. And now I work with those employers to deliver financial education programs to their employees and charge them way more than they would have paid if I was their employee. So it works out well in the end. Trust and back yourself. Particularly when I started, because I was a young person, I had never known anything about business, I took on everything that experts and gurus told me. And sometimes, I believe only we know in our gut what the right thing to do is. Because we're the only expert in our own life. So whether MoneyGirl lives or not, I'm one of the people who is managing it. And so what's right for me will impact what's right for MoneyGirl or not. And I learned sometimes it doesn't help to keep listening to experts outside of myself. Sometimes I need to sit down with myself, be quiet, clear myself out, and be like, okay, this is the problem at hand. What do I feel in my gut is the right thing to do here for me and my community? Because I do believe at the end of the day, what's right for me translates to what works well in my community as well. Ask for help. I tried to solo it for so long, and in the first 2 years of starting, I burned out 3 times. Who does that? Who does that? It took me months to recover from a burnout, and then I would go straight back and do it all over again. Ask for help, and love all of you, including your failures. At an event I spoke at for Women's Day last year, I said every failure is a story waiting to be told on a national stage, because it was a national event and my whole talk was about 5 failures that I've experienced, which were actually delightful, like not getting a job or launching a social enterprise at the start of a pandemic. It worked out well because we had to pivot and move entirely online, which actually made the program way more accessible than it would have been if we were Sydney-based. We fulfilled one of our own values, all by accident. Failures, yeah. And yeah, things are only as complicated as we make them. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, as I do often, I like to sit down and think of what fat can I trim to make this simpler for myself, because the healthier I am, the better I'm feeling, the more impact I can create sustainably in the long term. Okay, that's it. Thanks so much, everyone. Yeah, I'd love to have a chat with you all.
Yeah, I've already got tons of questions. I've got
Yes.
probably 3 that I really want to ask.
I'll grab my stool now.
The first one I have here is from an outside perspective. Not many people understand like the differences between, for instance, the Western system and then the Islamic financial system. Can you just touch on a little bit about what's different, and also just the perspective you have growing up?
Okay. So some of the money stories that I grew up with was that, here you go. Thank you.
That's all right.
So money is shared. Money is not necessarily a resource. It's not my resource. It's a shared resource. And we all get a portion to sustain ourselves and our families. But money, like all resources, are shared, and our community has a right over it. So from the first dollar that we earn, we set some aside to be given away to the community. And it's not like charity, like a tax deductible donation kind of thing. It's shared money. So that's one difference, but like here we get to a certain point, or at least that's what I witnessed. It's like charity is something that happens once we're earning X amount, then we will donate X amount, and it's more about, is it a registered charity? Is it a tax deductible donation? Which I feel is fair, valid, but also, not how most Indigenous communities around the world operate. We always have had, sorry, giving. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Great.
Yeah, from an outside perspective, I've always been told it was like that charity system, and so it was incorrectly explained to me. So like for the Islamic faith. So,
Yeah.
It's interesting about how that being shared.
Yeah. So things are shared. What else is there?
That's all right. I can talk about
Yes,
some questions.
go.
Yeah. If you have any other points, feel free to talk about it after with some time.
Yeah.
The other one I wanted to ask about was you're talking about the impact frameworks and how you're doing this to sort of legitimize your business
Yes.
or talking about it for other people. Who were some of those other people that you were trying to sort of, I guess, impress by
Yes.
having those frameworks? And then what ended up making you decide, okay, you know, that's not even important that opinion, like we just could actually have an impact and make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was people, stakeholders that we wanted to impress was mostly potential funders. Honestly, other people in the startup sector, because we are a little bit over obsessed with numbers, and we do need numbers to be able to make decisions about what is working and what isn't working. But there is a sweet spot with it, and that sweet spot changes as well with the maturity of the organization and the team, right? So a team that's right at the start, it's not feasible or healthy for them to have a robust system the way a multinational might, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can change over time. But we'd heard when we were starting that it was social impact in the business world is not seen as a legitimate enough at that time outcome of the business. So the business, if the business is not able to show the same profitability as a commercial business, then it needs to have significant enough numbers in the impact space to say, hey, we're still a legitimate business because look at numerically the impact that we are creating. There are so many things in impact that cannot be measured. So it's a flawed system to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's a really tricky part. I think it gets taught that way in school. So people I think in lecturers think about how we actually legitimize that social impact part and how they're always from a business background usually.
Yeah.
So they're comparing it to sort of financial metrics as well.
Yeah.
And then, I agree with that completely. And so it's something to really difficult to measure. The first question you'll get as a social impact business is, okay, how do you measure this?
Yeah, and I would now, if I was in those accelerators now and people were telling me this, I would question and say, hey, I want to see numbers of the harm the commercial businesses are doing. Why is this even a question? All businesses need to make an impact in order to be legitimate. If they're not making an impact, why are they existing? Give me their numbers, right? I think we ask those questions because we're still quite attached to an older way of business, a way that we now know doesn't work, and we're in the period of transitioning to healthier, more sustainable businesses, healthier for everyone. You know, we're now more focused on businesses that are healthier for the people running them. They don't burn out. The employees, they have a good workplace. People in planet, the impact they're making. But we're in the process of transition. So we're still stuck asking the old questions. But now I want to ask, hey, what is the point of asking that question? If we already know that that system doesn't work anyway, why bother training new entrepreneurs in a flawed way of working? Just forget that stuff. Train them in a new way.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah. Another question I have for you, and I find this really interesting, I think this will have that moment for a lot of people in the room, is do you have a story specifically about this person that you've helped through the business and maybe their journey you go, I'm sure you have that one story where you go, this is a great one to tell you. Do you have one like that?
Oh, I have heaps.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Oh my god. I always end up crying when I tell it.
Yeah, exactly, yeah, it's an emotional issue.
So one day, I got a call from one of our graduates. It's unusual for students to call me directly. So I was like, oh, I hope everything's all right. I assumed something really bad had happened. So I pick up the call and they tell me they've graduated like 6 months ago or something. So they weren't in a current program. And they said, hey, I just thought I'd call to tell you that I have just moved into my new house and I have left my abusive partner. I did the things you taught me to do. I saved up an emergency fund and I left him. And that was the first time someone had called me to tell me that, so that's always stayed with me. There's been many times since then someone's told me something similar, and I obviously had no idea what this student was going through, because there's no, it's not a selection criteria, you know. Everyone is welcome to the course, so that's why they were calling to tell me. They said, you wouldn't know what I was going through, but at the time I was in the house with my abusive partner, and I wanted, and another interesting thing they said was they didn't change jobs or something, so they were still earning the same amount, they were in the same job, nothing changed in their external world. And that's why that feeling is so important, because after going through the course, they just felt like, oh, I can do this. And then they did it. 6 months later, they were in a new home and they were safe.
And with your outreach too, I find this interesting in terms of, okay, you've got this and that students that you want to reach and these type of students that you want to reach. Was the violence or abusive relationships a goal from the start, or is that something that sort of just like was linked, inextricably linked to the problem you're trying to solve anyway with financial literacy for immigrants?
Yeah, it was kind of a goal from the start, I think, because of who the founders are.
Yeah.
You know, that influences a small social enterprise a lot. I'm a survivor of violence. It was important to me that we serve survivors of violence. I don't run programs for people, like especially for people who are in the process right now, although like in this case, people will self-select into the program, but we do run programs that are specifically for people who are in the rebuilding stage after having left. So that was from the get-go. That's why we have the model of subsidizing as well, because a lot of those women don't have access to resources to access financial literacy. And there aren't free evidence-based programs, at least. And that's why we need our corporate partners in order to fund those programs.
And what was the outreach like to those people? So like, how would you find those people to enroll into your programs or like enroll?
Yeah, I think the fact that I worked in the DV sector helped, because I had like lived experience and expertise in the area. I was a caseworker, so I knew the key stakeholders in the area who were working with those people. So that was the other thing. It was the relationships that I had built with those organizations, and I knew they were working with those women in a different capacity. Let's say they're helping them find a job, for example, or they're retraining the women so they can re-enter the workforce, something like that. I will partner with that organization to be the financial literacy provider for their client. So it's a win-win-win for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was.
And so it just built on your story that you already had. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. And I think I kind of accidentally, kind of strategically used PR well, because I share my personal story quite widely, and that connects with those women.
Okay.
And so they will find us, because there aren't, at that time, there weren't any other financial literacy providers. Now there are, but there's still very few who will be trauma informed, and where the participants can feel like essentially safe. Yeah.
Gotcha. I'm going to throw to the audience for Q&A. From the Eventbrite, what people submitted, we had one question was how you different from something like a barefoot investor. So
yes.
I think you've pretty much covered that already. Do you want to say anything else on top of that?
I think the main point of difference was that we just cater to very different markets.
Yes.
I was one of the people who read The Barefoot Investor to be begin with, and then after, I think at that time, chapter 1 or 2, I was like, cool, this is all there is for me in this book.
Right.
The rest is for a completely different person. And so what about people like me? Like, we need help as well. We have different needs, and fair enough, we're not homogenized people, so it makes sense. And that was it. It was like we had a different lens on, so we were able to cater to the people who were previously falling through the cracks.
Yeah, definitely. And then you have that lived experience to be able to share with people. Yeah, I think that's a completely different program.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's covered. I think one of the other ones was they wanted to ask, there was one other about social impact and how they can get involved in social impact. And then there's another one about, so yeah, maybe I should do that one first.
How to get involved in social impact?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this, but it's just that broad question, but thinking about maybe some of the networks or things to look to it, or some resources that they can get in touch with, some communities.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we have in New South Wales SECNA, which is SECNA, Social Enterprise Council,
And then
New South Wales and ACT. So there's a Social Enterprise Council Australia. Within that, there is a state-based bodies. New South Wales and ACT share one. It's called SECNA. They are led by some of Australia's oldest, most experienced social entrepreneurs. And those, it's a very supportive, inclusive, and welcoming community. So if you're interested in social impact, that's a great community to be a part of. They sometimes do local dinners here in Newey, but they have bigger events in Sydney. Like last month, there was a one-day festival at UTS. Then the other thing would be to connect to, so this would be your local accelerator space, to be connected to spaces like this, because a lot of opportunities and events will come to us through spaces like this. Yeah, I think that would be, besides the general stuff of if there's particular areas within social impact that you're interested in, find the organizations that are already working in those areas and connect into them, into their communities, because that's a great way to learn more about the problem that you're interested in solving, and also to learn what are people already doing in case you want to create a solution, but there's no point in reinventing the wheel. So yeah, connect with the people and orgs who are already doing the things you want to do, connect with SECNA, connect with your local accelerator. Yeah.
Great. What questions do we have from the audience? Yes, please, Greg.
Terrific talk. I wanted to ask about the confidence measure. So when, so the social enterprise, and have you been able to first of all, have you had people invest with you, or are they just paying for the programs? And how does confidence work as a measure for a convincer for that?
Convincer for who?
So for the people who are providing the funding,
Yes,
so
okay.
if you've taken away because I fully understand this idea that you may not even see the impact for some time or never, you just have to know that it was there when they left the room. So how have you found convincing people to put in money based on confidence, really?
Yeah, so there's, great question. Confidence we measure is also self-assessed, by the way, so it's not it's a hard scientific number. It works, in our experience, has worked well. I think when in the first 2-3 years of starting, our challenge wasn't necessarily around impact. Most with funders or sponsors or corporate partners, our challenge was more around, we were both very young women, and when we walked into a room very confidently with a solution that Australia has for a problem Australia has experienced for a century, the question we would get is, if no one else has solved the problem, why do you think we can? And my answer would be, well, since no one has, why don't I just try at least? Our challenge was more around age and race discrimination. It wasn't ever really around impact, because we were like community created as well. So in terms of, that's why we were like the evidence, as complicated as it made things for us, it also made things very solid for us, because it's hard to poke holes into, this is what the community has expressed, verbally, written, this is what they need, this is the impact that it is creating. We also don't measure long-term impact, like you mentioned, like we don't have a 12-month follow-on survey to capture the numbers of the story I shared, for example. Maybe in the future we will, I don't know, but yeah, it would be too complicated for us right now. But yeah, in my experience, the impact measurements were never really the issue. Yeah.
Any question at the back here?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you approached the business model of a social enterprise, and how pre-planned were you in that approach, and how much of that was, I guess, discovery, like we think that this is how we can sort of fund these things, and yeah, can you talk to that please?
Yeah, absolutely. It was and still is, I think, a work in progress. I think one of the joys of remaining small is that we can pivot. And so we started with, I think the model that we started with was B2B only. I'm not even sure, because we pivoted so quickly, because we realized that doesn't work. And so, like, our challenge with B2B at the start was that the decision-making timeline is far too long, and at the start there isn't cash flow then to keep going. And so then we created a B2C offering, which had enough cash flow to keep us going until corporates were making decisions, because they have like anywhere between a 6 to 12 month timeline for making decisions, so the funnel is just significantly longer. And then we did tinker around with it, including pricing. So the model eventually landed at B2B has one pricing, B2C has a different pricing, and B2B is subsidizing the B2C pricing. But it wasn't that from the start. We tinkered with it, and we learned lessons along the way, like when we made mistakes and we saw what wasn't working. And a lot of the times community educated us, sometimes harshly, but that's I think it's worth it to keep that door open with community, because sometimes like an elder would sit me down and be like, my pricing was they were like, hey, look, what's up with this? Like, it's not accessible pricing. And so I learned, for example, about pricing scales and like B2B and B2C pricing. I was like, I thought I had to have one standard price for the same product. And then I learned about pricing for equity. Equity in action in pricing looks like a pricing scale where people are paying based on their ability to pay. So I may charge one client one thing and another client another thing, and that's okay. And when I first tell people that, they're like, don't your clients have a problem with it? In my experience, no, because I'm able to tell them this is what equitable pricing looks like. You're Unilever. I'm not going to charge you the same as I'm going to charge Jenny's Place, which is a local NFP in Newcastle. How does that make sense? No, you pay significantly more so that the people at Jenny's Place can access the program. Makes sense? And to most people it does. So we learned lessons like that, and then rejigged it, and we still do. So we're considering now, for example, if B2C, if there's still tinkering that needs to be done with the model. So it's a work in progress still.
The front end.
On the same topic, what's the kind of current split between how much time you spend on B2B and B2C? And I guess whoever else is working on direct programs?
Yes. So this is why we're still tinkering with it. B2C takes up way more time, and we are often just running just above cost because they're subsidized programs and stuff. So we're working out what is a good balance, because B2C takes a lot more effort in terms of marketing, but it's a shorter funnel. B2B takes less effort in marketing, it's more about relationships, but it's a much longer funnel. So there's pros and cons to both, and we're trying to figure out like what actually works for a small organization. But in terms of time spent, B2C takes up way more time in marketing and sales.
Okay, we'll go to one more question, but before we do, we'll wrap up with a couple of other things here. First thing I need to get everyone to do is quickly 3 question event feedback. It'll literally take you less than 2 minutes. The reason why we do this is that we can have these events, and obviously we're sponsored by the New South Wales Government, so a big thank you to them. But it makes a massive difference for us in our reporting to be able to run these events. So yeah, please, 3 question event feedback would be great. Especially if you enjoyed my own talk. Let it know at the moment. And then I think, Boris, did you have a question at the front here?
Oh, I had a bunch of them, so I'm just trying to work out which one to ask. If someone else has got a question.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, please.
So I'm in consultancy, so knowledge as a service is a thing that means a lot to me, so doing education. I've had a friend roll out a data literacy program like their work. One way that they quantified it was not having the information. What's the risk to the company? You make a decision without that versus having information. So you quantify what's the risk of people being uninformed versus informed. Essentially.
So that flip side of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's the question. Is like, for instance, if that wasn't to happen, that program wasn't to happen, right? They didn't have that knowledge.
Yeah.
What would be the downside of negative things?
Oh, how does your friend measure that?
Yeah.
They were
I
looking,
have follow-up questions for your
Yeah.
friend.
like spreadsheet errors or bad accounting where they just like paid a customer twice, things like that.
Yeah,
Not being able to read bar charts and scalpels and things like that.
yes,
So
yeah,
having poor decisions.
yes.
Sounds like that's where it's like having that empowerment of knowledge is like a key thing. So I'm trying to figure out. I like confidence metrics. Like I'm always trying to get what are different ways to convince businesses that education, which has a long lead time, is important. So I was wondering if you've like looked at risk.
Oh, no, I can't say I have. No.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too.
Yeah, yeah, like what is the, like I think it's the, like we include that in the why, like the negative impact
The problem.
of financial illiteracy, but we don't measure risk, no, of the client not accessing financial literacy.
It's kind of like a waste reduction kind of thing as well, isn't it? Like reducing the waste and all the redos of work and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
It's like a 5S sort of thing, or a 6 Sigma sort of
It's like you're either providing value or you're reducing the cost or a risk.
Yes.
In a lot of situations.
Yeah.
Has everyone finished that event feedback? Because what I'll do now too is I always forget to do this whenever I host these, but I'd love
Not
to take
today.
a photo. Exactly.
Not today.
So do a quick photo. Everyone